Director of the Integrated Development Program and CIMMYT representative for the Americas for the introduction to this seminar. Dr. Brown, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Isabel. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for some of you. Welcome. We are over more than 60 participants on the Zoom and several others connected through the live stream on YouTube. It is my pleasure and honor to present this today's webinar, and I think it reflects a lot of CIMMYT's core values and objectives. We are here to generate more knowledge, to manage it towards innovation, and especially to create different agri-food systems. And we do that through learning by doing, and at the same time having the force to leap forward. Today's webinar will be presented by Andrea Gardeazabal. She works for CIMMYT in the Integrated Development Program, and she works on data-driven agronomy, knowledge management, and ICT as a vehicle for innovation in agri-food systems. Andrea proudly holds an MSc in Information and Communication Technologies for Development from the University of Manchester, UK, and an MSc at the same time in Political Sciences from the Los Andes University in Colombia. And Andrea has over a decade of experience in designing and deploying large ICT for agriculture and education projects around the globe. And she's currently coordinating efforts to monitor, evaluate, have accountability and learning in the IDP project portfolio. This entails the coordination of a whole team that designs and operates robust information systems for the collection, analysis, and dissemination of data. She is part of MasAgro, but also of a portfolio of 24 other projects that all together generate and pioneer innovation hubs with participative research approaches in the region. She prefers and fosters an open source system and is researching knowledge management methodologies for innovation in agri-food systems. And very recently, Andrea and team, together with CIAT and IASA, were honored with a very prestigious award in data management for one part of the system, which usually does not go to agriculture, but to many other sectors. So it shows that what we're doing here is not only relevant for our own sector, but also for other areas and sectors. Andrea, we are happy to see your presentation, and after the presentation, there will be a space for questions and answers, which you can send through the chat. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bram, for the presentation, and good morning, good afternoon, and maybe good evening to some of you connecting from different parts of the world. Thank you for joining this webinar on knowledge management for innovation. As Bram was saying, we've been working on this from our experience in Mexico, so I'll be presenting some of the ideas around the topic based on what we have here in Mexico, but also reflecting some of the ideas of the frameworks that are out there around innovation for knowledge management. So maybe I'll present a slightly different perspective for what knowledge management is and what we are expecting from knowledge management in agri-food systems in particular. So let's begin with what we consider an agri-food system, and it's basically very good example of a planetary scale complex adaptive system, as it integrates different levels of complexity in heterogeneous actors, different types of interactions and connections that can, across all the interactions, impact the outcome of a concrete system. So there are no necessarily linear processes within the system. And when it comes to agri-food systems in particular, the grand challenge is we would need to achieve sustainability. We all know that we need to get to more food, increase food security in the world in the next 30 years. But we also have to be aware of the boundaries, ecological, socioeconomic boundaries that the system has as well. So it is indeed a grand systemic challenge that we would need to tackle from this perspective specifically. So maybe rethinking on the traditional ways of doing research, of the basic focus on monodisciplinary activities, rather than interdisciplinary approaches is what we are aiming and expecting from these systems. So when it comes to sustainability, as I was saying, we all know the boundaries that it has, and we know that we don't have unlimited resources. We all know that we need different strategies and different perspectives to tackle these huge grand systemic challenge that we have. So when it comes to systems theory, we can also think and we can also define sustainability as a measure of the extent to which systemic changes over time can even move those components of the system even beyond the limits. This meaning we can even, if we identify the boundaries of the system, if we understand the dynamics of the system, we could even move towards stretching the limits and the boundaries of the system in such way that we achieve the desired outcome, instead of just sitting to wait what the unintended outcome is going to be. So based on this and within these complex contexts.
Jainara.
Yes. Okay. So based on this complex context, knowledge becomes a critical enabling factor for healthy agri-food systems, in the sense that it is required to generate contextual information and processes, for instance, to increase productivity, profitability, reliability, or resilience. If we don't have that, if we have deficient knowledge, and deficient knowledge meaning not integrated knowledge sources, or not taking into account, not being inclusive enough to incorporate different knowledge types, it may result in poor production, decreased stability and flexibility, and harm to natural resources. Interventions that do not take into account the complete knowledge landscape may even result in unintended consequences. For instance, here in Mexico, we have a very common case where we come from very controlled environments with our maize hybrids, and we go to the south of Mexico, where their cultural and knowledge landscape around native varieties is very, very important. So even if we go with a hybrid, ensuring that increasing yield is the need, the knowledge context around the hybrids is not going to open any door for sure. So yeah, that's just an example of how deficient knowledge of the complex context can even hinder interventions that have good intentions for sure. So if we go to knowledge management, what it means, traditionally knowledge management in the research and development sector has been focused or placed in the diffusion side of the process. So it mainly is comprised by communication or training activities and strategies. Here, I'd like to propose a more holistic approach for that knowledge management definition, including the creation of knowledge mainly, the acquisition of existing knowledge such as tacit knowledge, indigenous knowledge, native knowledge, but also explicit knowledge as well, no? So scientific knowledge and historically knowledge available. It also includes organization, integration, capture of data that is out there but is not systematized yet, use, and the analysis of this whole bunch of processes to understand the impact of the group's collective knowledge. So we're not, again, only talking about the knowledge management that has been traditionally placed in the diffusion side of the process, but trying to understand the knowledge management as a holistic and complex process. So what does knowledge management mean for agri-food systems? In the first place, we believe, we've been reviewing different frameworks that I'm going to talk about later, but we believe there are at least 4 key principles that need to be taken into account to be able to use knowledge management in these extended sense to manage and to generate innovative outcomes for the grand challenge that I have been talking about around sustainability. So first thing is application of systems theory and integration of knowledge types. Knowledge management should be able, within the agri-food system, to unpack functional systems dynamics. And these means understanding the layers, understanding the key stakeholders in each particular scale. So we're not only talking about national or global scales or only farmer local level scales. We're talking about the general different types of scales here. We need to be able to unpack those functional system dynamics at different scales, understand who the actors are, understand how they relate within each other, understand what are the interests and their needs, to be able to identify what would be the pathways that could lead to desired outcomes, right? So unpacking these functional system dynamics could answer concrete questions such as sustainability. And sustainability as a systemic question would mean to understand what is sustainability, what are we aiming to sustain, for example? What are the boundaries of that particular aim in terms of sustainable? So are we going to aim for energy? Are we going to aim for land? Are we going to sustain production? Are we going to sustain food? As I said, we don't have unlimited resources, so we need to balance the act, we need to balance that decision. It also means understanding at what scales, that as I had been mentioning before, how that would happen if we go to a decision where we say, okay, we're going to sustain food security and use of resources. How are we going to do that? For whom are we going to prioritize in that? And which are the trade-offs of each of these scenarios? So working with scenarios is actually a very interesting approach to understand systemic dynamics and to understand the trade-offs, basically, because as there are no unlimited resources, trade-offs are always there. Second principle that we considered for agri-food systems would be reciprocal relationships, power, and political dynamics, meaning that rather than having these top-down approaches where the knowledge was transferred from the experts to the farmers, we would need to have knowledge strategies across all players, integrating different types of knowledge as well. And many studies also have proved that political dynamics can even hinder or promote benefits from knowledge management. For instance, a community of practice that is managed and lead by experts can definitely lead to policies or center interests overlooking the knowledge that is out there in the field with farmers, for example. It also needs to consider different types of knowledge. As I've been mentioning, we need to be able to integrate tacit knowledge, to understand what the knowledge that has been there for ages in terms of agriculture, agronomic practices. The farmers know their fields, the farmers know their dynamics, the dynamics of their land, but also understanding the local dynamics, not only at the plot level, but understanding the value chain dynamics and understanding what knowledge is in there, what are the beliefs in those relationships is very important. Third principle that we believe is the context-specific agricultural knowledge for sites, actors, and processes. So we're here suggesting that we need to move away from the monodisciplinary traditional way of doing agricultural research and knowledge generation that is normally around this general recommendation domains or monodisciplinary activities, so focusing on particular linear processes within the agricultural production rather than understanding a more systemic approach. So within the context of specific agricultural knowledge is not only about understanding each site, each plot with soil information, with weather information, with agronomic management information, but also considering how that particular actor, so the farmer, or how that particular process within the value chain at the local level is influencing this whole dynamic. So you should also consider socioeconomic variables, not only for the farmers, but again, for the local dynamic, and also value chain processes from commercialization to marketing, post-harvest, and some other dynamics that are specific to a particular context. And the fourth principle that we believe is needed to be able to apply a complete knowledge management approach for agri-food systems is the digitalization and decision support system. So these three principles that I have been mentioning before pose a grand challenge in terms of data management. So we're not here to blame the traditional way of doing agricultural research or knowledge management for agriculture, because there were not the tools to manage that data in the way that we have today. So we do have huge data sets, but we also have the opportunity to use data mining techniques, big data analytics, and many other tools to understand, to work with that data, work around that data, and use that data to support these other three principles, to generate systems theory methods to understand the power and political dynamics, and also to generate very context-specific and site-specific information and recommendations to improve not only yield, but sustainability as a whole in the production system. So again, posing data analytics at the forefront of any knowledge system would be needed from the digitalization component. So allow me to walk you through very briefly the different existing agricultural knowledge management frameworks that we've been revising and understanding what are the main topics that they have been working around. So knowledge integration is always there. It's been like the basic component in agricultural knowledge management theory, meaning we need to integrate tacit with explicit knowledge, meaning we need to integrate different types and sources of information as well. Then we have some studies around decision making at the farmer level. So what are the main factors that the farmer takes into account to make a decision? And within that particular system, the production system that the farmer has, what are the main dynamics? So it has some sort of systemic approach, but it's not taking into account the larger system that that particular farm is embedded in. We found some other frameworks around creating and sharing tacit knowledge, basically trying to codify or understand in a very systemic way, where is the knowledge, how is it generated, and how could we translate that tacit knowledge that is out there generated by the interaction of people into some, let's say, tangible and explicit knowledge. We also found some other frameworks around knowledge brokering and the key role that brokers play within the farmers and the explicit knowledge, as we call the research, or some other academic exercises around knowledge. Finally, we found this decision-making framework, which is more general in terms of understanding the system as a whole. And it analyzes boundaries within that system for knowledge sharing, basically. However, it doesn't include the main knowledge management processes, which are creation, acquisition, and all the others that I was mentioning in our definition. In general, we can say a knowledge system is more and more understood as an emergent property, not as a concrete or very static dynamic that is generated from the interaction of individuals, and that can, have its own dynamic around the knowledge in a particular context, and that it's also, of course, developed by the stakeholders themselves. So what about innovation in this whole context of knowledge? Innovation is an emergent phenomenon in a complex system and results from nonlinear and iterative processes which require consistent changes and adaptive management. This means we can look for innovation, we can find some pathways to innovation, but the pathway is nonlinear, it's iterative, and is not a result of a transfer of knowledge, as a result of a co-creation of knowledge. In that way, we believe that innovation in agri-food systems needs to be very well studied. And we've been revising these frameworks as well, and we found that this agri-food innovation system framework as a general concept is increasingly popular, furthering the transition from developing a linear transfer of technologies, which is the traditional way of working with knowledge management in agriculture, towards a systemic approach based on processes of integrated problem analysis, participatory priority setting, co-designing and implementing technological and social organizational solutions. I'm going to present here one example of these innovation framework in agriculture, where they actually consider the complex agricultural problems as the basic or the origin for the framework. So they define very well the problem within the complex system of an agri-food system, which means interaction of different levels of actors, of different stakeholders, of different sectors. And then they believe the innovation capacity stands within the infrastructure around that system and the ability of that system to generate or to manage that particular complex problem. We could think of many complex problems when it comes to agricultural systems, but for instance, we can talk about seed systems or generation of pricing dynamics in the market. So complex systems involving not only the actual or the concrete activity of the farmer in the plot, but his relationships and his interactions with the market, and the market interacting with, for example, external prices. So for instance, this particular case poses an example on how the prices of steel going higher didn't affect the actual import of machinery for conservation agriculture in South Africa, but it was actually affecting the development of local machinery in South Africa because of the price of the steel. So that complex problem needs to be analyzed not only from the perspective of building capacities within the local stakeholders to generate, let's say in this case, to develop new machinery for conservation agriculture, but it needs to deal with external prices of steel, which, by the way, was not affecting, in that particular case, the import of machinery that was not locally adapted. So again, these analysis around innovation in agri-food systems has to deal not only with what happens at the local level, but needs to interrelate the different layers of activities and processes. So finally, to go to a conclusion with the theory of this presentation, we are proposing in this particular paper that I was mentioning at the beginning, that is under review, a concrete framework that aims to integrate different concepts that I've been talking around here. So the first thing we would like to include in this framework is the different types of knowledge that need to be included in any type of framework that entails knowledge management these days. Then we have the knowledge management processes, the traditional knowledge management processes, but again, not only focusing on sharing or analyzing, but also creating, acquiring, storing, and integrating. And we believe these processes act as a lens for these type of knowledge to be able to integrate the type of knowledges, the type of knowledge in the different settings or contexts that normally have time periods, space, and actors. So this is like what we like to call the scenario for innovation, where again, the knowledge in different types is getting into the system through the lens of the knowledge management processes. So creating the knowledge, acquiring, integrating that knowledge needs to happen in order to have an innovation outcome that is that comes normally out of reciprocal relationships among the actors. So as I said, we're not expecting innovation to come out from a linear and very planned process. We're expecting innovation to come from relationships that are reciprocal, that are not top linear, that are dynamic iterative relationships, which through a lens of knowledge management, you know, the help of creating, acquiring, storing, integrating, and analyzing the data can derive in concrete innovation outcomes such as local capacity building, joint problem solving, farming empowerment, community-based participatory research, or institutional change processes and innovation barriers management. I'm not gonna give more detail on these because I'm gonna talk about our experience in Mexico, and maybe there I can throw some examples around these processes that we believe can happen when we do accurate knowledge management processes. So let me begin with that, with our experience with knowledge and innovation hubs in Mexico. The hubs, for those of you who haven't heard about it, are the innovation method or strategy that we have here in Mexico, and is the way in which our work is organized, basically in agroecological distinct hubs. In each hub has a physical infrastructure on the one hand, where we have different types of plots. We have research platforms that come from basic research, from station of long-term trials that let's say include that explicit knowledge into the research platforms. The research platforms are located at the regional level, so they're basically to test and validate in controlled environments those technologies that are known that could work for particular production systems. Then we have the modules, which are already farmers plots, and there are farmers plots that are allowing us to do these comparisons side by side with the innovation and the traditional practice to understand how is that particular innovation doing in an uncontrolled environment with the management practices of the region and the traditional knowledge that is going around there. Then we also have the extension areas where we combine different innovations depending, depending on the needs of the farmer, and the farmer decides what he wants to do from a menu of technologies. So we don't like to call that as a technological package or a concrete recommendation for each production system. We rather say we have these options for you, and you, with your knowledge, with your experience, within your context, you choose from these. So they choose and they combine different technologies and different innovation and solutions, and we are testing how are they doing as well in there. And then we have the impact areas, which are farmers that just decide on their own that they are going to apply those. So for extension areas and for modules, we do have some very detailed follow-up from extension services to the farmers that act as brokers of knowledge, from what we have in the research platforms and the basic research to modules and extension areas again. The second part of the hub is the network, where we have the different stakeholders at different scales again. So we're talking about local level, regional level, and so on. We have the different stakeholders connected around topics such as sustainable production, sustainable technologies, conservation agriculture, and so on. So we have researchers at the local level, we have input suppliers, farmers, extension services, governments, and a hub manager role is to connect the dots, basically understand who is who in that particular context, connect the dots, and broker the communication and the conversation around the topics that we are interested in. So going back to the knowledge management principles that I was mentioning at the beginning of the presentation, allow me to give you some examples of what we've done in terms of each of them. So application of systems theory and integration of knowledge types. I need to say we are, after 9 years of working in the field collecting data, we are at a point where we could do a very good use of that data to understand from a systemic perspective many other things. However, what we've done in these cases, in the first place, we have integrated co-creation approach. As I said, we're saying we are adapting and validating technologies, even from the research perspective at the local level, connecting that within the hub and brokering communication to understand the particular needs of that context. So the research actually answers the questions of that particular community, and it's not only research answering questions of the community, but co-creation, as I said, in terms of generating new knowledge between the researchers and the farmers. And it's CIMMYT brokering that relationship, but the network at the local level starts to work on its own, starts to move on its own. Second thing here is innovation with cereal-based systems. So we've been working on systems already. We already consider intercropping, rotation, livestock, and post-harvest as some other technologies that need to be included, because the context we understood through the hub model, we understood that if we would approach only with conservation agriculture technologies 9 years ago, that wouldn't be an option for the farmers. So we would need to we had the need to understand what was the actual need of the farmer and what was the context in each of these hubs. And even within a hub, we have sub-regions, and the hub managers understand very well the dynamics of those sub-regions and differ the strategies depending on the context. So again, within this hub model, we've been able to integrate tacit knowledge with explicit knowledge, even with established knowledge as well. On the second principle that we have, which is about context-specific agricultural knowledge for sites, actors, and processes, we do have these context-specific strategies. As I was saying, we have sub-regions within each hub that understand the particularities of each production system. We have research platforms that focus on specific production systems within a hub. And modules and extension areas allow this adaptation for particular regions. So after 9 years, I can say we are no longer saying that conservation agriculture has 3 very static principles, but we understand that depending on the context, depending on the region, depending on the cultural context as well, let's say the no burning action is already assigned for conservation agriculture, even if they're still doing tillage. That's just an example of how we have adapted the knowledge that we brought from the explicit and the scientific side, and have adapted in a way that the cultural and the knowledge landscape, the complete knowledge landscape, can adapt. Finally, the network allows to build strong partnerships and meaningful relationships, so the hub dynamic generates customized capacity building and innovation processes. So our strategies are differentiated, not only in terms of the agronomic management, agronomic recommendations that we generate, but also in terms of the dynamics in the network that is needed to be able to broker efficiently the knowledge among the different actors. So here in the picture, we have an example of one of the hubs with the different strategies at different sites and different activities and actors and stakeholders that take place into the brokering knowledge strategy. The other principle that we had is about relationships and reciprocal relationships, power and politics dynamics. And we have found along these years that the neutrality that CIMMYT has and the apolitical nature has been important to feed the role of brokering knowledge in the different scales. I'm not only talking about the very local level where we have the brokering between the farmers and the research at the local level, but I'm also saying what we have had to do at the national level with the government, the agronomic sector, and the other different sectors, the private sector, for example. CIMMYT, as a neutral actor, has been able to complete a role that is very important in terms of brokering. Neutrality is also a condition to build trust. So that's why we believe we've had these, let's say, if you can call it success in terms of building the network around knowledge, around agricultural and sustainable knowledge, because we come to the place where we're not saying CIMMYT has the truth, or CIMMYT knows, or CIMMYT has been doing research and this is what we bring, but we have been able to listen to the context, understand what's going on out there, and being able to act as a real broker, connecting the different dots, understanding the needs, and redefining our strategies to feed those needs as well. So the last one is digitalization and decision support systems. We've been working on that for a while, collecting data. Basically, we had a system for the last 8 or 9 years collecting data, agronomic data from the fields. Then maybe 5 years ago, we completed that system with an ODK, an open source system to collect data for other variables, not only agronomic variables, but socioeconomic variables, training variables, and some other variables that we consider relevant from the system. And this year in particular, we are launching our integrated system, which is a data collection system on the one hand, but it's a decision support system as well. Bringing all these data that we have through the lens of a systemic analysis to understand what are our main indicators and how we can use that data to lead decision making and to monitor if we're actually getting the outcomes that we want in terms of innovation and in terms of not only innovation, but the food security and the sustainability that we're aiming to have. In numbers, in 2019, the hubs, the technologies improving sustainability were adopted in more than 161,000 hectares. We had more than 1,900 training events. We have more than 800 sites adapting and validating innovations at the local level. And in general, we have been able to georeference and to capture data from 42,000, from more than 42,000 modules, extension areas, and impact areas. We have 12 hubs in operation. And more than these numbers, I would like to say in terms of the innovation outcomes, and remember when I was presenting our proposal of framework, we say innovation outcomes should go around local capacity building, joint problem solving, farmer empowerment, community-based participatory research and technology co-creation, and institutional change. We are not quite there, but we have some evidence around that. So publication was done from the Colombia Business School for specifically analyzing MasAgro hubs. And these publication concludes that partnerships, co-creation, prototyping, and experimentation shape the work in the hub and allow to work in collaboration with local communities, fostering innovation, solving complex problems, and increasing both product being able to increase farmer empowerment in the long term, to restructure power dynamics and inequalities at the local and the national level, or even incentivize institutional and behavioral change. We believe we have achieved that somehow, no? And if we go to the hubs and we go to the field and we ask the people, we have very successful testimonies and successful stories about people, not only the farmers, but also the network and the relationships, as I said, around sustainability and the agri-food systems at the local level that we can consider as successful. However, we are clear that we need to do more research on using the data that we have in this sense. So far, the model, as I've been saying here, has been applied only in maize and wheat-based systems in Latin America. So it would be interesting to adapt it to non-cereal crops with different structured value chains and in different cultural contexts to test what needs to be adjusted. Local hub teams need a combination of technical and agricultural knowledge, which gives them the credibility to be able to build relationships with value chain actors and identify sound recommendations, and combine these technical skills with the knowledge management and brokering skills is key to be able to apply this model in a holistic approach as we are aiming to happen. Finally, the application of systems theory methods and modeling techniques to the collected data could help to understand higher level dynamics that we are not being able we're not being able to see yet, and identify correlated outcomes or patterns. So we are currently at the stage where we want to understand what are those outcomes, intended and unintended, and what were the innovation pathways that brought us to that, or the factors that hindered that innovation in particular context. I can give an example here where we began with the hubs, as I mentioned, at the national level, and we had a particular state that has a very concrete condition and had a leader at the time that decided, a political leader that decided that he wanted the hub to be adapted at the local level for the state level. So we have a very successful hub at the state level where we have around 5 or 6 projects, a project portfolio that is operating at the local level, integrating different capacities, integrating the network, leveraging from that network that has been built for years, and having a portfolio that integrates not only agronomic interventions, but also commercialization interventions, sustainability interventions in terms of water use efficiency, and many other responsible sourcing projects as well. So many other things that have been integrating in that particular context let us think that we need to understand better what has happened there, understand with data what has happened there in terms of the systemic change that we see that's going on in that particular context. So that would be it for me for this presentation. I'll be more than happy to take any question that you have, comment, suggestion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Andrea, for the excellent presentation. And we do have a couple of questions that came in through the chat. Please, if you have more questions, allow yourself to put them into the chat. First interesting question. Often knowledge and know-how gets lost at the micro level, from gene to the next gene, at the micro level, sorry, from one gene to the next gene, but at the macro level. For example, the Aztec water management system was more intelligent and had excellent know-how, and that was lost for centuries. How can CIMMYT support knowledge retention and development post projects and individual interventions? And I think you're on mute, if you can.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you're back. Thank you.
Yeah, it is indeed a very interesting question. I was saying main challenges when it comes to knowledge management is retaining knowledge, retaining the increase of knowledge, and being able to integrate the knowledge that is existing out there, not only from different actors, but historically, in time. So I would say nowadays we have better options for that. We have ICT tools, and we would need to have more discipline in terms of the project's operation to be able to gather data and be able to, as I said, take pictures of what's going on in the project, along the project, and not wait until the end of the project, or have pieces here and there about what's going on in the project. So what we've done, I'm not saying that's the final option, but what we've done is design very detailed monitoring systems for the projects where we collect data at the plot level, but we also collect data from the processes themselves within the actors, with the training strategies that we have. So we collect data for each of that beat of the project, and we monitor that data on a regular basis. When it comes to an end, the project has enough data to be able to generate analytics that can then be transferred to a general reservoir of information in that sense. I would say data and the ICT tools that we have on the one hand. The other big chunk of the problem is the culture, and that we call the culture. I don't know what's going on with my camera, I'm sorry. The culture of the people, and the culture in terms of generating knowledge and systematize that knowledge. So it has, and knowledge strategies also have to deal with the interaction between people and the culture around that interaction. So trying to communicate that it's important to systematize any learning that you have and reflect on that particular learning to understand if that is useful for others, right?
Thank you, Andrea. And as a follow-up question to that, there's one that came in asking, so is this system that you present exclusively for one project, and will the system then disappear when MasAgro stops?
No, the system, as maybe Brand mentioned, it's an open source system. The data collection system and the analytics system is all managed by us, and it's not going to disappear when MasAgro ends. It has been financed by MasAgro, but it can be adapted. It's modular, and we have the capabilities to adapt it to any other project, any other crop. It receives already different crops, not only maize and wheat or any cereal crops that we are already working with. And the system is aiming to continue because we already have a lot of users that are demanding that we don't stop after MasAgro ends.
So, and also, can you develop a hypothesis or multiple hypotheses of the impact based on the stories you collect that can be tested at a higher level of integration in terms of differential publicly available agriculture or human development statistics between areas influenced by the hubs and areas not influenced by the hubs?
Yeah, I believe, again, the data opportunities that we have now with ICT technologies should also come to the social sciences per se, because I'm not sure if we're quite there yet in terms of being able to gather very detailed information per different actors and being able to combine that information in a higher level, no? Rather than just doing the normal or traditional use case methodology for research in social sciences. So yes, I see a great opportunity there, collecting not only hard data and doing, you know, the normal quantitative indicators that we've done, but also understanding how we can use that particular data at the very individual level of a system and combine them to do with some data mining techniques that we already have, and you know, artificial intelligence is as huge as we can think, and it's able to recognize text, read different conduits and pathways within the data to understand what are the commonalities among different actors. One thing we've done that it's interesting, I feel it's interesting in terms of agronomic research, not agronomic, but agri-food system research, we, instead of comparing plots, we started comparing clusters of farmers based on their socioeconomic conditions combined with their agronomic conditions. So we do have some clustering exercises in Mexico because we have the data that considers socioeconomic variables per farmer and integrates them in different clusters, which are not necessarily done by proximity, which is the normal research that we've done in that sense. So yes, it is a huge opportunity.
Thank you, Andrea. Within the complex system relationship, the measure of impact also implies that the picture that we capture today and at the moment, and the analysis that we take from that, and the impact we calculate actually may contain different levels of adoption, and those actually may change over time. So how do we capture those dynamic changes and this continuous change, which is inherent to a complex system of innovation?
Yeah, I believe it has to do with the traditional way of measuring impact that we have. We think about it as we take a picture at the beginning, then we take a picture at the end, and we try to track the linear path between the initial and the final picture and what we've done. Rather than that, I would think that it's, when it comes to complex systems and when it comes to understanding complex systems, what is most important is to understand the pathway. As I was mentioning, when it comes to innovation, when we want to understand how innovation has happened after a whole bunch of dynamics, very complex dynamics in a particular context, rather than saying, how was it at the beginning and how is it now and what can I attribute to what I've done, is saying, what was the pathway? how was it? What was my role in that pathway? And how did I interact with other actors to generate this concrete final output? And in that particular exercise of tracking the pathway of innovation, we're more able to understand these changing dynamics. I would say it has a lot to do with the method and the way we've been measuring impact for years.
Thank you. Another and a bit a tricky one, I believe, is the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. Sorry, I'm going to say that again. The International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture is a treaty that regulates CIMMYT's germplasm activities, but it also recognizes farmers' knowledge as an integral system component that must not be exploited without access and benefit sharing. How should CIMMYT equitably engage with farmers in terms of technology development, testing, and deployment in the frame of the treaty?
Yes, I believe that's a huge challenge, and it has to do with the trust relationship that we have with the farmers and the respect that we have for the knowledge of the farmers within the models that we work with. I would say first thing is, knowledge is part of a collective action. Knowledge is not placed in any of the actors of a network, of a system. Some knowledge in particular belongs to each of them, but the sharing of knowledge is the act that needs to happen at the end. How we can see that is, or how we can see the value in it in the knowledge management processes in terms of, okay, what am I getting if I share my data, if I give my data, if I give the property of my data, or any other aspect related to that data or to that knowledge, is what I get if I integrate my knowledge with some other. Am I going to get something better than if I use it on my own? So our logic, our philosophy there has always been like that. If you give me your data, we've been collecting data from farmers, and we know it's their data, and they deserve something out of it because they've been contributing with that data. So our philosophy has been, okay, let's think about it. Let's think about how integrating this data is going to generate a higher level of outcome in terms of innovation, of recommendations, and the outcomes that we're expecting. And not only for the system as a whole, but for that particular actor that is contributing with data. So if we're able to go to the farmer, to go back to the farmer with value information, contextual information, site-specific information, then I believe we are making some progress on that.
Thank you. And two last questions before we close off on time. CIRAT and INRA have moved towards impact assessment by tracking partnership development, for example, networks that sustain innovation pathways. Can you comment a little bit on the network analysis that is being done in your knowledge management system? And then Victor is very happy to connect you to the INRA people, as he has been trying since 2016. But any comments on using network analysis as CIRAT and INRA are doing?
Yes, maybe that's a very, very nice topic. I really like it because we've been using data, as I said, agronomic data. We use that data, and we were very focused on increasing yield. And then we were very focused on doing sustainable production. But then we understood that when we had particular recommendations, we needed the information about who is that particular farmer. Is it a woman that doesn't have any capacity to make decisions on her own plot, or is it a man that is owner of the farm and can do whatever he wants, or has more margin to decide? So when we were with the final recommendation of the final solution for that particular farmer, and we didn't know who he was, then our process in terms of knowledge management was cut. So understanding the network analysis is very, very key in terms of brokering the knowledge and being able to generate a complete flow of information around the stakeholders was key. We started doing some basic network analysis, I would say, trying to understand who is more innovative, who's more willing to innovate, and trying to pose their resources and efforts to be able to scale in a more proper way. That's one thing that we've done in the past, but we believe the network analysis with these, as I was saying, more research is needed from our end in terms of system theory, utilizing these data that we have to understand what are the dynamics of the network. So we know who is who in the network. That's our first step there. And with that, we have been able to generate more accurate strategies in terms of brokering the knowledge. But we also want to know, with the data that we have, what are the dynamics that have pushed or hindered different innovation pathways.
Thank you. And one final thought for this final question. What are the key, many institutions are doing knowledge management, but not many of the institutions, especially in the countries where we work, do it with a system development or a systems innovation, a systems in action view. They don't connect to that. What is the major constraint and how can we move them into that thinking?
That's a good question. I think knowledge management, as I said at the beginning, has been posed and located only at the dimension or the side of the diffusion from the whole research and development process. So beginning with saying knowledge management is more than that, maybe changing the name to, well, some of the thing that is not knowledge management can help. That's one thing. The other thing is understanding the knowledge is intangible. So dealing with intangible is very, very complicated. So being able to make it tangible, to make it real, to make it of value, it's, I would say, the key of that. So the way we've done it, in some cases, at least for the farmers, when it comes to basic things as, please farmer, give me your yield because I want to understand how to improve it. The normal question would be, what are you going to give me in exchange? So we would say, I'm going to give you recommendations to increase your yield, or even if you don't want to increase, what is what you want? No, I want to have information about the markets. Okay, let's go and see if we can bring you that. So I would say making knowledge management and the knowledge value tangible in terms of even money. We know what it means, money in the agricultural sector, or even knowledge that would bring more profit or more sustainability would be key.
Thank you, Andrea. And so we are sharp at 9 and we'll close this seminar. If there's any other questions, Andrea will be happy to respond to them. And as usual, we will put them on the Insight CIMMYT. So thanks a lot, all of you. We were over 100 participants or close to 100 participants on the Zoom and many more on the YouTube. Take care of those that are close to you. Take care of yourself and let's be gentle. Goodbye.
Thank you all for your attention.
Bye-bye.
Bye.